Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second episode on the third series of the Ajyal podcast. The series is called Youth Perspectives in the Arabian Gulf. And today's episode is about big green initiatives in the Gulf, a youth perspective. This series is brought to you in collaboration with the Arab Youth Climate Movement in Qatar and is being represented by my colleague here, Nishad. And with us is our guest, Rahman and Mufta from Qatar also, and he's part of the Sustainability and Environment team of the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy for the Sustainability Strategy for the FIFA World Cup 2022. Welcome, Rahman. I'll just introduce the purpose of today's episode really quick. And so, in general, the Gulf is taking big green initiatives, and they're being presented to the public once the decision-making process has been completed. And we want to weigh in as youth, especially you as Gulf youth, on this. So do you agree with the decisions being made? How can we foster better decisions next time? How can we include youth in the discussions before the decision has been finalized? And so we want to talk about a few projects regarding nature and climate. One of them is the FIFA World Cup that will be in Qatar. The second one is the Saudi Green Initiative, also the Middle East Green Initiative, and finally, Masdar City. These are just some of the examples that we're trying to highlight for our audience that are happening in West Asia. And we want to weigh in on these. What do we think? They're big initiatives, and we want the perspective of youth. That's why we're having you here with us today, Rahman. All right, so let's jump to our first segment, quick questions with quick responses. Number one, from 1 to 10, how involved are Gulf youth in climate decision-making?
I'd say about 5.
Okay. And number two, which is more effective, community-based action, government action, or private sector action in the Gulf?
Government-based actions.
And number three, and finally, how would you describe youth involvement in climate action in the Gulf?
Say very upcoming. It's starting to uprise.
All right, perfect. Thanks a lot. Let's move on to our discussion now. The first question that we're going to ask you is, are big green initiatives considered greenwashing in oil and gas exporting countries? And let me just give some context here, just so that to spark that discussion or to spark exactly what we want to get out of you, Rahman. So reading through the Saudi Green Initiative, which has a website, and we link it down in the description for the audience, we're looking at, the purpose is to increase reliance on clean energy. We're looking at offsetting the impact of fossil fuels and generally protecting the environment, and what they mean by it. And so, I saw a few targets there: 50% renewables in the kingdom by 2030, reducing emissions by by more than 4%, planting 10 billion trees, and in the Green MENA project, I think it's around 50 billion trees. And they also aim to raise protected areas. We want to weigh in on these as youth. Just one thing to note is that within those initiatives, we were seeing that Aramco is part of the initiatives. We're not here to talk about specific companies. We're just here to ask: is it normal to have an oil exporting country or an oil exporting company part of a solution for the climate? Is this considered greenwashing by you? What do you think about this?
I think every country just uses the resources it has, and for the longer period, the region did not have any resources that were tangible or until the finding that there is oil in the ground. So the countries had to prosper from it and develop. And for the longest period, they did rely on it, and it was heavily their income for most of these countries. But a lot of them do intend to diversify from these initiatives, or from just using these resources to something else, and they want to economically diversify. And it's not a bad thing that they're doing it using the oil, because they can't really stop it to prosper, because they need to be using those resources right now. Um, and also the demand of a lot of these resources is not coming from the region. It's also something that other regions that are not oil infused uh, uh, regions that are still using it. So the demand comes from there, and they also did not fully transition without uh, still they still rely on us to transition or to live a normal life in the regions.
Excellent. I'll just take it from there. So, Guru, absolutely fine. You said much of the production from the oil and gas industry are beyond the state. If you take in Qatar or Saudi Arabia, most of the oil and gas which are produced locally, it is very small percentage. Much of it is taken by other countries which doesn't have a larger oil and gas reserve. So also has to take place in those respective countries too at the same time. If not, there is a global demand. Of course, the producers will be keep producing as long as there is a demand. So, as a young person, how do you feel if there is no such demand happening in the coming days? Do you think the transition will be faster in the Gulf countries?
I think they'll have to adapt, and it has to be faster, because there's no the money they will be making out of these products or out of these resources is not going to be as much anymore. So they will have to find a way to transition. But it's still a hypothetical thing. It's still, you still see the patterns in all of these countries, and you still see that they are making the shift as slow or even slower than the region that we're living in. And a
And
lot
also,
of the
like
countries
seeing
do have
into
the resources, at least.
excellent. So also seeing it like how Ryan mentioned the greenwashing. I've seen some of the projects in Qatar and Saudi, like Aramco supporting or ADNOC supporting UAE, Shell supporting initiatives in Qatar. Do you think it is good or bad? Because most of their fundings are on research, what I understand is.
I don't think it's greenwashing. I think it maybe seem like it because there isn't a lot of tangible stuff. The movement toward setting new goals or sustainable strategies in the region has not started for a long time. So you can't really see the results, especially whenever you transition sustainably. The transition is somewhat slower than any type of other transition. So it's just something that's not tangible. You don't see it, but a lot of the targets are being met, and a lot of them are targets that are not really intended, or not really, you don't really see them being used as greenwashing. So these companies don't really sell it as, yes, we're only doing these, and we're because we do these projects, because we do these programs, we are kind of what's the word for it, forgiving for whatever we did so far. They never use that as a narrative, and it doesn't seem to come up as a narrative in a lot of cases.
I think we're coming back to what you, Nishad, and Dr. Rania spoke in the podcast conclusive webinar for the first series, which is, in one part, Nishad was also explaining that, there are other countries who are demanding those resources. So, decreasing the export of fossil fuels also depends on the importing country. But at the same time, Dr. Rania was mentioning these initiatives are all great, but she doesn't agree with them because, what is more important is to reduce consumption or reduce the emissions within the country, and not create new initiatives that are good for the environment, but keeping the emissions, the export, the imports all the same. So we can't offset before we decrease emissions. And so this is where the dilemma is happening between us youth regarding the regarding the emissions topic in the Gulf. What do we do? How do we demand it? Because if we keep on exporting, people are criticizing us. And if we do great initiatives in the Middle East, we're also being criticized. So, what are we left with here? What's the best solution,
The best solution, I would say, is just to wait and wait for the results, right? Because then people will come and see the cities that you just mentioned. You mentioned the development of green cities, green developments, a lot of the systems, a lot of the things they use electric. Like for example, we have a big example here in Doha, the new energy generation facility, and they have all transitioned to be more efficient. They're all switching towards that, and you can come and eventually and see that it's something that is actually in the ground, and it's something that's happening, but it's not getting the coverage that needs to, just because the production and the demand is still the same.
I'm also a point to bring up, because I remember from the discussion with the last call, also the thing about equity. The countries which have been demanding now had a huge industrial revolution happening for like 50 or 100 years, while the countries in the Gulf just started like in 20, 30 years back. So there's an equity issue also in the same time, because they need to grow. Of course, this is for the people and the people who live here. So that development is also critical at this point of time. So when the countries like the US and other super developed G7 or countries are demanding Gulf countries, that's also making sure that the transition comes with economic benefits too. So how Abdurrahman was mentioning, as long as the demand and for production is there, if the country doesn't transit, there is a huge potential for those sort of fossil fuel industries to still keep moving on.
And the more these countries also demand, the more we can develop, because the cost and the production will increase. So then we can transport more, investing money into us to develop our inner cities to make them more efficient and more green. So it definitely works both ways. And I believe this is the same kind of argument that Canada has used in a while ago, because they came to us and they came to them and they criticized them because they still have a lot of oil production and oil extraction. And then they told them, yes, but we have all of these plans to transition. And they did that way earlier than this region. So they're not being criticized as much, because the transition is happening and the economic diversification towards making economical change in the country has started a long time ago, and it's in progress, and it's much bigger than here, at least in a rate of percentage.
Thanks a lot for that. I think it's pretty clear regarding this topic in the Gulf, like the ideas, what we can criticize, what needs to, have patience at least, and just, look forward, because I guess the transition is definitely coming, but, the way forward needs to keep in mind the economy and how, the entire country or the entire region will move forward. Let's move on to talking about the FIFA World Cup. Let's talk about Masdar City. Let's talk about Mshayrid. So do tell us a bit about the FIFA World Cup, but also just mentioning here about Masdar City. Going back to greenwashing, Masdar City, great buildings, 40% less water, low carbon cement, 90% recycled aluminium. And then we have companies in there like Schneider, Mitsubishi, Etihad Airways, and all of these who emit a lot of carbon, but who have offices in a very sustainable city. What do we say about that? Is that also greenwashing, or is that a nice solution while reducing emissions at the same time? Same topic, but now, FIFA World Cup, Masdar City.
So I would talk first about Masdar City, because you mentioned that there will be there can be like a green city, but then you'll have companies within them that they have their own agendas, and maybe they're not the most considered the most environmentally friendly companies. And it depends on the agendas, because a greenwashing exists. That's why it's a talking point, because it exists, and a lot of you can see that companies do it, but it really depends on their agendas, and you can never really tell. But at least the city itself has developed, and you can see that they have done whatever they can do to improve it. Whether they can bring companies, that maybe don't really support the agenda or greenwashing, or if they know or they don't know about them, is not really some sort of determined,
Yeah.
Yep. Do you want to touch on other initiative like the upcoming FIFA World Cup? Does this trend would be something that we would see in the coming days, like Expo 2020 is also known to be carbon neutral. So you think this region actually leads in this? Because of course, this all needs a lot of money because it's not easy. Like how Ryan mentioned, if those companies taking up Mazda as their offices, of course, there need to be return of investment, and having sustainable city in the most adverse and extreme temperature states like in the Gulf. It is not that easy compared to normal weather countries like in the US or Canada or other European countries when you compare to or other Asian countries you compare to. So there is that shift, which is also need to be understand that we live in a super arid country, which is close to desert. So it has its own ecosystem, which has to be taken as a context before you say, oh, we build a green city in a desert ecosystem. And what do you expect? We need people to come and buy it. Of course, some buyers, like how Abdul Rahman mentioned, need not have this green agenda in their mind, but of course, they might use that as a propaganda or agenda to greenwash themselves. But of course, the developer always looks for inhabitants to come and join there, irrespective of which origin. Of course, you cannot stop them. They also need return of investment for a huge investment of such a great green cities in the region. So, Abdul Rahman, going back to you regarding the World Cup and the Expo 50, do you think this is a trend? And in the coming days, if you hear another Olympics happening in the region, which is carbon neutral again, do you think this is going to be a trend?
I mean, because of the World Cup, we developed so an organization in the country have developed carbon credits, and they are certifying carbon. So a lot of the agendas that we pushed were very carbon friendly in a way. And you've mentioned all of these numbers that Masdar as a building also has when it comes to reducing their impact. The World Cup have very similar numbers. We have managed to get 30% energy efficiency in all of our stadiums. We've managed to get 40% water efficiency in all of our stadiums. We've managed to get a lot of our materials that were used when it comes to construction. For example, 90% of all our construction material was recycled, and that is much higher than the original benchmark in the country right now, which is 10%. So we upped it to 90% at this point. And all of these initiatives are pushing for other stuff, because since we got certified with this green certification system, which is a local certification system, it's expanded and it managed to sink out to the country. So we have Lusail city in Qatar, who has a mandatory requirement of achieving a certain star system within this green system. And that was pushed because of the World Cup. The World Cup has also managed to push a lot of other stuff like green transportation. The rail project that we have in Qatar wouldn't have been operational except because the World Cup is happening, and it got expedited very fast. Green transport, we have also our busing systems. A lot of our buses, and part of collaboration with the World Cup, managed to get a lot of electrical buses to be operational before the World Cup and for the World Cup. I mean, also there's an 800 megawatt solar plant now being built by Kahrama, which will be partially operational by the World Cup, and it will feed into the World Cup the stadiums, and it will be part of the World Cup stadiums will be generated by solar power. So all of this was pushed because the country has an agenda based on our QNV, Qatar National Vision of 2030, and it is economical diversification. We don't want to stick to this agenda that we are only 95% oil based. We want to diverse. We want to find some other opportunities, and we know that the World Cup will be part of it. And with it came all of the environmental sustainability initiatives that also rose within those, and a lot of social ones as well, but maybe they're not very relevant to this topic. But you can see that it's also very driven change that we want to achieve, and it's targeted, and it will set sort of just targets for it basically.
Thank you so much, Abdul Rahman. We've run out of time, but I guess the message is very clear. We have great cities in West Asia specifically, of great examples of how green cities should be developed. Maybe a question for the audience: what is holding back other cities around West Asia, other cities around the world from achieving what is being achieved in the Gulf regarding these cities? Because they are truly great projects, and the future of cities. Maybe what is holding them back is maybe money, like the funding, maybe it's the expertise, maybe it's decision making. So how can youth around the world maybe help push those cities to, to change and become more sustainable? We leave that to our audience. But in general, thank you so much, Nishat, for being here with us as well and for posing the questions. Thank you, Abdul Rahman, for this great episode. And we'll see you, our audience, in our last episode, next time. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. See you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into this episode with Abdul Rahman and I. We hope that you enjoyed it. Please remember that all the information and our guest's bio are linked in a blog post in the caption section below. And let us know what you honestly think about what was discussed between Abdul Rahman and I in the comments section below. Next week will be our last episode on this series, and we will discuss women leadership and climate action in the Arabian Gulf. Stay tuned for that, and see you.